Jake Ludington here at HP Discover, and I'm here with Paul Muller, and we're going to talk a little bit about the software-defined enterprise, which is not something that HP has put out in the market, if I'm correct.
Yeah, you're right. We talk a lot about, obviously, the software-defined network and the software-defined data center, but a trend that I'm certainly seeing, and part of the Enterprise 2020 work we've been doing, if you had a look at that future sort of state of the enterprise, enterprise2020.com, is we're seeing an increasing recognition that business leaders are now understanding that their customer experience, the way they build their products and services, is not supported by software, but is in fact defined by the software and the data that consumes and produces. And there are great examples, whether it's the Ford motor car with the sync plug-in interface. I mean, literally there are hackathons now for the Ford motor car where people innovate apps on top of the raw platform of the car. So the question is that a car or is it a computer with sheet metal wrapped around it? Banking finance, classic example, one of the major banks globally has 13,000 developers working for them. That's more developers than Microsoft is reported to have working on Windows. So the question becomes, are they a bank or are they a software company that happens to trade finance? I mean, a classic example would be your own mobile app. I mean, think about when was the last time we went into a bank branch to do a transaction? I mean, pretty much the mobile app defines the banking experience, and as we all know, trading algorithms behind the scenes control how that money is managed. It literally does define their enterprise.
So, in this world of the software-defined enterprise, what is the CIO's role? Because it sounds like there's the dramatic shift where not everything that would normally be IT is actually now IT.
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase Jeff Immelt, who, as you know, is the CEO of General Electric Corporation. He was at a Australian Financial Review conference with a whole bunch of media and the public in the audience, business leaders, and he's actually said, if I quote him correctly, "I'm going back to school on big data and software." Now, I thought about that and thought, wow, that's really cool. A CEO who understands the value of IT as a business differentiator. And then I stopped to think, wow, if I was his CIO, I'd be pretty concerned right now, because he's basically saying, I want to know as much about IT as the guy running IT. And certainly as a product marketer and manager, I know myself, I increasingly see IT as being a critical element to getting my innovations to market. And we're increasingly frustrated when our own IT department can't move at the speed we need them to. So certainly if you're an IT leader, I think understanding the level of backlog and demand that you have, understanding whether that's growing or shrinking, in other words, is the problem becoming worse and potentially leading to dissatisfaction, and understanding that you are not the sole source and that you will potentially have the business going around you. And it's a question of how do you get back in the middle of that debate without slowing it down to be seen as an as an innovator, not an inhibitor.
Wow. So
a lot of information.
A lot of information right there. But so you're saying GE CEO is now in a way like thinking about being the chief data scientist, if you will, of the organization.
Again, I want to paraphrase what Jeff said. His words were pretty clear, but I think every business leader understands now that their business, that they're running a software business, whether they realize it or not, their business has become software and data, and it's a question of how do they get smart about, development practices, things like agile and lean. How do they get smart about data science? How do they understand what their data scientists are doing? How do they get smart about design? Because let's be honest, right? It's not just about having great data and apps that work. They've got to be apps that are functional and that has a great user experience, because that, again, defines a lot of what we do. I mean, I don't know about your own world. Are you seeing that recognition that there is a shift from being a back office to an enabler?
Well, I'm seeing a lot of people who are kind of wishfully thinking about being able to do more, but I think a lot of people are still stuck in the trying to flip the 70-30 model where they're mostly in maintenance mode still.
Yeah, and I think that is actually going to be the CIO's big challenge, and let's be honest, it's not the CIO's challenge, it's the CIO's reports. It's the head of ops, the head of apps, the head of security. Is how do you shift that mix, because they do need to keep the lights on, but they need to, and it really isn't about shifting the mix to spending more on innovation, it's about being more responsive to change in what I call stable accelerated change. So I want stability, but I want the change to happen quickly as well. And it's not an either or, it's got to be both, right? Because once your business is defined by software, the software has to be impeccable, the availability of the services needs to be unmatched, and your ability to control unmanaged change is absolutely critical.
I would say that's the other piece that I have seen, is that some people maybe are trying to move too fast, and you start to see more bugs introduced into shipping product as a result of people trying to be maybe faster than they should be.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you start to see the stress in the system around things like defects getting to market when they shouldn't. I mean, there's obviously been a very public case of a major government putting out a service that didn't work, didn't scale as expected, where the desire to get it out there quickly wasn't necessarily matched by the organisation's capability in terms of quality, agility, et cetera, right? Scalability, something as simple as scalability is something that we all need to think about now. As you get to, the holiday season, as a simple example, you get these massive spikes in traffic. If you can't go to one retailer, you'll go somewhere else. That business is lost forever. So you need to think about the whole thing holistically, especially with embedded systems. So things like cars, aircraft, etc. There is no such thing as an acceptable defect, right? I mean, I don't want my plane dropping out of the sky because somebody was having a bad day on Friday and had to knock off early, right? So that's the other element we need to think about is as the software's become so critical, quality becomes absolutely paramount.
I think there's a human factor in that too, right? Because you have to identify the right people that can lead that transformation.
You hit the nail on the head. I like to say, as technologists, I do talk about layers 1 through to 7 of the technology stack, you know what I'm talking about? But layer 8's the critical one, right? And that's the people. Because, if you can't change the people in terms of their behaviours, you need to change the people. And that becomes the real challenge for all of us, is how do we bring them along on this journey? And my concern is that unless we acknowledge that change now and help people make that transition, we're going to leave behind potentially a bunch of really great people who have the right skills but maybe aren't given the right coaching to make that shift to being, as I said, it's not about becoming a service provider, it's about recognising you're part of the product now and you need to think differently about your role.
So it's almost going back to an artisanal sensibility about the entire organization.
I think it really is, and I think especially when you talk about artisanal in the sense of what I love about the old school artists, and a great example, if you're familiar with cars, is the Mclaren F1 car. I don't mean this Formula 1 car, I mean the F1 itself. It was the last car ever designed by one person on pen and paper. Gordon Murray drew the entire thing end to end, understood every nut, bolt and screw. And it's seen as automotive perfection because it was an act of artistry and design and completeness. He looked at it as a whole system. And I think IT in the context of the software-defined enterprise is very similar. You don't make a change to a part of it without understanding you're changing the whole. And that artistry and that expression of depth of understanding, multidisciplinary capabilities, which again is the artisanal way of looking at things, I think is absolutely relevant. Sorry, I get very excited about the topic.
All right, I think we'll leave it at that because that's a good place to stop. But thanks as always, Paul.
Thanks so much for allowing me to join you, Jake. Appreciate it.